Hello microbiologists, it's Miss Ray. We're going to be learning about the types of reproduction for lesson 2 today. We will first learn about the types of asexual reproduction, along with the advantages and disadvantages of this type of reproductive strategy. We also will be learning about the advantages and disadvantages of sexual reproduction. So make sure that you have your packets ready and a pencil ready to write. Let's go on and get started.
Unit 2, Lesson 2 Notes, Cell Reproduction. A throwback to our characteristics of living things back in Unit 1, we know that all living things must be able to reproduce by forming new individuals. And we talked about how what that meant was that organisms either could reproduce either asexually or sexually or both. And so we're going to talk specifically about those two types of reproduction and what that means. So, asexual reproduction, the production of genetically identical offspring from a single parent. So, again, with asexual reproduction, our main takeaways is identical offspring, one parent needed. We're going to talk about the 4 types of asexual reproduction. You are going to need to know not only the definitions, but also images if you see an example to be able to identify that example or type of asexual reproduction. So let's get started. The first one we're going to talk about is budding. This can be defined as a new organism develops as an outgrowth. What that means is that you have the original adult and a small offspring grows off of that adult and eventually drops off to become its own identical individual. As you can see that happening in the picture. We need to remember, again, outgrowth as our sort of key term. Fragmentation is the next one. This is a new organism develops from a removed piece of a parent. In other words, this either could be a part falls off, it's cut. There's a variety of ways that, again, that division can occur. But what ends up happening is that the original adult that lost the piece grows back the pieces that were removed, and the piece that was divided or cut off ends up actually growing what was missing. Example, sea stars do this. There's also several worms and also plants that do this type of fragmentation. And so we want to remember cutting pieces and stuff as our sort of key hints that this is this type of reproduction. Binary fission. This is a single-celled organism divides into 2 identical daughter cells. In other words, we have a cell and it doubles in size and then splits into 2. This is done by specifically single-celled organisms. So unicellular organisms, bacteria, protists, things like that. Parthenogenesis. This is a really cool one, and it's a little bit different from all the other ones because typically this can be done by a more complex organism. And so this is a female parent can produce an embryo without fertilizing an egg with a sperm. In other words, you have a female population. There's no males there, or the males are at such shortage that the females, rather than needing to physically mate or get the sperm from the male to do the fertilization process, they don't need it. They actually clone themselves utilizing their eggs. So their eggs will create a full individual. And that individual will be female because, again, it is a identical clone of the original parent. Now, with this type of reproduction, asexual reproduction, there are some advantages to this and there's some disadvantages to this. So we need to know this. So first off, with asexual reproduction, the amount of time that this takes is very, very quick. You're not having to go hunt down a mate. The development process is typically more simplistic, less cell division, things like that, that needs to happen rather than a development of an offspring within either an egg or within the body of the organism over time. So again, it's quicker. That means the turnaround, the population jump, the recovery is quicker. Second advantage, only one parent is needed. Again, not having to hunt one down. You yourself can do this. It's more energy efficient. Again, not having to hunt down a mate, typically less resources are needed. Think about the amount of resources needed for a human to, again, create an offspring, and what that process, again, takes between fertilization and even birth. And then lastly, it's faster than sexual reproduction. Again, it does not take as long from when the process starts to when we have our identical individual. Now, there are some disadvantages to this because those advantages seem like they're pretty helpful. But the disadvantages, there's no genetic variation here, which means that genetic variation can help protect a population from being completely wiped out by disasters, by diseases and other kind of things, because there might be an individual that has some sort of immunity in that. And you don't get that with identical populations. Species may be only suited to one habitat. Again, the variation that organisms that can do sexual reproduction have is that they can sometimes adapt and evolve better than sometimes to more than one habitat, or can be suited to more than one habitat than an asexual population. Diseases may affect all the individuals of a population, so it's again more likely that if a disease travels to a population, everyone will get wiped out. Versus genetic variation, there might be some individuals that might be immune or better suited to survive, and then can jumpstart the population again without being wiped out. So with that, let's jump over to sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction is the fusion of two reproductive cells. This is going to be egg and sperm formed by two separate parents. So we have egg and sperm being utilized, fertilization, two parents needed. And it doesn't always look the same. That's the main thing. We define sexual reproduction not by a process of how that happens. We define it by the fact that egg and sperm is utilized. So whether that is a human or whether that is a plant, they're still sexual reproduction because an egg and sperm are being utilized. So there are some things that we need to define within this reproductive strategy. So egg, this is a haploid sex cell created by female organisms. And we're going to go into more what haploid actually means in lesson 4 when we talk about how egg and sperm are created. But sperm is a haploid sex cell created by male organisms. Haploid means that the cell currently contains only half the set of DNA. This sort of checks out because when we combine an egg and combine a sperm, we need to get a full set. And if we had two full sets of differing DNA that we then combined, the double amount of DNA would be so confusing that the cell that would be created would be unviable, wouldn't survive. And then we have the term fertilization. This is the fusion of two sex cells, egg and sperm, to create a zygote. The zygote is the original full set cell that's created at the end of the sexual reproduction process. It is diploid, which means it's a full set, and then it will be able to replicate with somatic cells. Again, we'll talk a lot about those terms, somatic, haploid, in later lessons. Now, offspring produced by sexual reproduction inherit some of the genetic information from each parent. They don't inherit all. They inherit some, half. Sexual reproduction and sex cells can look very different depending on the species of organism. They're not all going to look the same. Animals, plants, fungi, they all look different. And again, how the process of how the sperm and the egg get to each other also looks different. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages here, just like the asexual reproduction, and they're very opposite. So it's one of those things of if you remember one of them, by default, you might be able to remember the other. So let's go over them. Advantages. This does produce genetic variation in the offspring. Each offspring produced has some variation. Now, the only thing that that's a little bit different here is twins, and we'll talk about that later on and what's going on with there. The species can adapt to new environments due to that variation. They have a survival advantage because they might have individuals that are able to survive in differing habitats, unlike asexual reproduction identical organisms. A disease is less likely to affect all the individuals in a population. Again, there might be some individuals that might have some sort of immunity or be better protected against a certain type of disease, and the whole population might not be wiped out. So then it can restart, versus asexual, which might wipe out a whole entire population and there's nothing left. Now, there's some disadvantages here. Time and energy. This process of development, it takes time. It takes time for not only the process of developing, because it's typically dealing with more complex organisms here. So lots of cell replication, but also just having to hunt down a mate. The process of sexual reproduction, like, it all takes time. It also takes energy. So having to hunt them down, having to, again, go through the process, creating the sex cells, all of those things take time and energy. And second, it's not possible for an isolated individual to reproduce. Sometimes organism populations or species will go extinct because maybe there's only males left. Maybe there's only females left. And when that happens, you can't bounce back from that. So that means that if something affects all the females or all the males, it could very easily knock out a whole entire species or a population, because both are needed for the population to continue to reproduce or to continue to grow. Now, it's on you now. You've got some practice to do. Please use your notes to complete the practices. We will again check this in our class to make sure that we know what we're doing and that we understand the concepts next class. Have a great day.